All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to tackle one of the biggest, oldest questions in all of philosophy, the problem of suffering. But we're going to look at it through a really unique and modern lens called BioIslam. It's a perspective that tries to square Islamic theology with our scientific world, and it offers a pretty fascinating faith-based answer to this whole dilemma. And here it is, the question. I mean, you probably asked this yourself, right? It's been a stumbling block for believers and a rallying cry for skeptics for, well, forever. It just cuts right to the heart of everything. How can you believe in a good, all-powerful creator when you look around and see so much pain and injustice? How do you make those two realities fit together?
You know, this challenge is so fundamental that it actually has a formal name, theodicy. Think of it as the intellectual arena where thinkers try to defend God's goodness against the evidence of suffering. Honestly, any monotheistic faith that wants to be taken seriously has to have some way of grappling with theodicy. It's non-negotiable.
So, how do people try to solve this? Well, let's start with the secular viewpoint. The source material kicks things off by looking at the hope we place in human progress and asks a really crucial question. Can science, all on its own, really fix everything? Okay, so if you take the idea of a divine plan off the table, the picture changes completely. From a secular or atheistic view, suffering isn't some cosmic mystery to be understood. Nope, it's just a series of problems that need to be solved. So the hope isn't in God, it's in us, in our brains, our technology, our ability to innovate our way out of poverty, disease, and all the rest.
Now this is where the argument takes a fascinating turn, pulling in something from astrophysics, the Fermi paradox. You've probably heard of it. The universe is so ridiculously huge and old that it should be full of alien civilizations, so where is everybody? One of the scarier answers is something called the Great Filter, the idea that intelligent species almost always wipe themselves out once they get advanced enough. And the source uses this as a powerful counter-argument. What if our greatest strength, our technology, is also our fatal flaw?
And that leads to this pretty stark conclusion from the source. The argument is, if you follow that purely scientific, naturalistic path to its logical end, what you're left with is a universe with no purpose and a species that's perfectly capable of destroying itself. In that scenario, the whole idea of long-term hope starts to look pretty shaky. The very thing we're counting on to save us could just as easily be our end.
So let's put these two big ideas side by side. On the one hand, you have the secular dilemma. Hope rests entirely on us, but we might just press the self-destruct button. On the other hand, you have monotheistic hope. Here, the faith is in a huge divine plan. The challenge isn't that we'll destroy ourselves, it's that we're just not equipped to understand the sheer scale of the plan. The problem isn't the absence of a plan, but our limited perspective.
The source drives this point home by talking about a scientific principle you might know as Occam's razor, or parsimony. It's the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best one, and that's fantastic for science. But the author argues it's totally the wrong tool for understanding suffering. This isn't a simple problem with a clean answer. It's messy, it's human, and it requires things like empathy, wisdom, what the source calls higher-order spiritual inputs. It's just a different category of problem. So, after laying out the limits of purely secular hope, the source pivots. It presents the BioIslam alternative, which is a specific prophetic solution, and it definitely requires a leap of faith. At the absolute core of this perspective is a concept called Nuzul Isa. In Islamic theology, this refers to the prophesied return of the prophet Isa, that's Jesus, before the end of time. This isn't just a BioIslam idea, by the way. It's central to mainstream Islam and, of course, most of Christianity. It's seen as the ultimate moment of divine intervention, the moment when everything becomes clear.
And the scope of what this would mean is just staggering. It's called the Great Clarification for a reason. According to this belief, the return of Isa would settle everything. All the debates about what Scripture really means, all the arguments about history, and yes, the ultimate question of why we suffer, all of it answered. It would be the final word on all our biggest uncertainties. Now, this is a crucial point. The source is very clear that this isn't just some wild speculation. This idea is grounded in a deep, methodical reading of Scripture. The author points to 4 specific verses in the Quran to build this case, framing it as a serious, researched, theological position. This is presented as a conclusion drawn from scholarly work, not just a shot in the dark.
Okay, that's a huge promise for the future, but it raises a really practical question. What about us? Right now, If this great clarification is coming someday, how are we supposed to live in the meantime? This gets us to what it means to have hope in an age of uncertainty.
There's actually a theological term for the time we're living in, ahal al-fatra. A fatra is a gap, an interval of time between prophets. It's a period where humanity doesn't have that direct, unmistakable guidance from a living prophet. We have the scriptures, sure, but we don't have the ultimate interpreter to give us crystal clear answers. And according to this view, that's exactly where we are right now.
And if you look at the timeline of monotheistic history, these gaps are nothing new. I mean, look at this. There was a massive gap of about 1,300 years between Moses and Jesus, another 600 or so between Jesus and Muhammad. So the source points out we're just in another one of those periods now. The big question, of course, is the one with the question mark. How long will this one last? Nobody knows. We're in the in-between.
So what does faith even look like when you're living in the in-between? Well, it means you have to get comfortable with what the source calls nuanced ambiguity. Since you can't have perfect, absolute certainty, you have to rely on careful study, humility, and good faith. You have to be guided by theo-humanistic intentions, basically a sincere heart trying to do the right thing while knowing you're only human and might not get everything right. It's about embracing the complexity.
And this all leads to this really beautiful, paradoxical idea in this final quote. The timing is completely unknown. It could be tomorrow, it could be 1,000 years from now. But that uncertainty isn't supposed to make you anxious. Instead, it's meant to inspire a joy of anticipation. The call is to live in a state of active, patient, and hopeful expectation.
And so that brings us right back to where we started, but now the question is a lot sharper. We've looked at two very different places to put our hope. One is in ourselves, in human progress, even with the massive risk that we might just blow it all up. The other is in a divine promise for a future day of clarity, even if it means living with ambiguity right now. So the final question is for all of us to think about. In this uncertain world, where do we choose to place our hope?